Or think about the best holiday you have ever taken. Pick one, a specific trip, a specific place. You can probably feel it right now. The warmth, the food, the way things looked in the evening light, it sits in your memory as something whole and real, a block of time that was genuinely good, something you would go back to if you could. Now, here's the question nobody asks. How much of that trip do you actually remember, not the feeling, the actual events, the specific hours? Because that trip was probably 7 days long. That is 16 8 hours. And if you sat down right now and tried to reconstruct it hour by hour, day by day, you would run out of memories in about 15 minutes. The rest is gone. What you're carrying around and calling a memory of that holiday is not a recording, where it is a handful of moments, 2 or 3 peaks, the best parts, the worst parts, and the ending. Everything in between has been quietly discarded by your brain as if it never happened. And here is the uncomfortable part. You have been making major life decisions based on that handful of moments for your entire life. This is the peak end rule. And once you understand it, you cannot look at a single memory the same way again. In the 1990s, psychologist Daniel Kahneman at Princeton University became obsessed with a question that sounds simple but had never been properly answered. When people say an experience was good or bad, what are they actually measuring? Kahneman had already spent decades studying how humans make decisions. He had won the Nobel Prize for proving that people are not the rational calculators. Economics assumed they were. They are emotional, inconsistent, and governed by mental shortcuts that produce predictable errors. But this question was different. It was not about decisions. It was about memory itself. He proposed a distinction that changed everything. He said there are two entirely different versions of you experiencing any given moment. He called them the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self is the one living through the moment right now. It feels everything in real time: the boredom, the discomfort, the pleasure, the pain. It exists only in the present. The remembering self is the one who tells the story afterwards. It is the version of you that decides how good or bad something was. It is the version that influences every future decision you make. And these two selves, Kahneman found, almost never agree. The experiencing self lives in the flow of time. The remembering self ignores time almost completely. What the remembering self actually records is two things, and two things only: the peak and the end. In 1996, physician Donald Rettelmeyer at the University of Toronto ran one of the most uncomfortable studies in the history of psychology. He recruited patients undergoing colonoscopies, a medical procedure that is genuinely painful and can last anywhere from 4 minutes to over an hour depending on the case. Every 60 seconds throughout the procedure, each patient was asked to rate their pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Rettelmeyer tracked every moment. He had a precise second-by-second record of exactly how much pain each patient experienced across the full duration of their procedure. Then when it was over, he asked each patient one simple question: how bad was it overall? What he found made no sense. Patients who had experienced a shorter but consistently painful procedure rated the overall experience as worse than patients who had experienced a longer procedure but whose pain had gradually reduced at the end. Read that again: more total pain, longer duration, but a better ending. And the patients remembered it as less bad. Duration had disappeared from their memory entirely. Though the remembering self had not calculated a running average of the pain across the full experience. It had simply looked at the peak moment, the worst it got, and the final few minutes, how it ended, and built its verdict from those 2 points alone. Everything in the middle was irrelevant. Kahneman called this duration neglect. The amount of time you spend in an experience has almost no effect on how you remember it. A mediocre 2-week holiday is not remembered as better than a mediocre 1-week holiday. A 40-year career that ends badly is not remembered as better than a 20-year career that ends the same way. Time does not accumulate in memory. Only moments do. Here's where it stops being a psychology curiosity and starts being genuinely unsettling. You'll have a story about your life, a narrative, a sense of which relationships were good and which were not, which jobs were worth it and which were a waste, which years were happy and which were not. That story was not assembled from a careful review of the evidence. It was assembled by your remembering self, the one that ignores duration and records peaks and endings. Think about the last relationship you ended, or that ended on you. However long it lasted, 2 years, 5 years, 10. Your memory of it is almost certainly anchored to a small number of moments. The best it ever was, the worst it ever was, and how it ended. The thousands of ordinary Tuesday evenings that made up the actual substance of that relationship, gone, averaged away. More irrelevant to the verdict your remembering self delivered. And here's the part that should genuinely concern you. Your remembering self is the one making your future decisions. When you decide whether to go back to a place, to stay in a job, to continue a relationship, you are not consulting your experiencing self. You cannot. It only exists in the present. You're consulting your remembering self, the one with the distorted records. Kahneman ran another study where he gave people a choice between 2 versions of the same holiday. In one version, the holiday was consistently good throughout. In the other, the same holiday was extended by 2 extra days that were slightly worse than the days before. Pleasant, but less good than the peak. Rationally, the first version is better. Fewer days of slightly worse experience. But people consistently chose the second version because the ending was better. They were willing to add real hours of real diminished experience to their lives, experienced by their real experiencing self in real time, because their remembering self would rate it higher afterwards. They were optimizing for the memory, not for the life. And here's the part nobody talks about. This is not a flaw your brain developed by accident. It is a feature. Storing every moment of every experience in full detail would require a brain the size of a building. The peak end rule is your brain's compression algorithm. It throws away the bulk of the data and keeps only what it calculates as most relevant, the emotional extremes and the final state. Or for most of human history, this was exactly the right information to keep. The peak tells you how dangerous or rewarding something can get. The ending tells you how to leave, whether to run or return. These are the two pieces of information that actually affected survival. Whether the experience lasted 4 hours or 4 days was irrelevant to whether you should do it again. The problem is not that the algorithm exists. The algorithm is brilliant. The problem is that you are running it on a life it was not designed for. A life where the bulk of what matters happens in the ordinary, unremarkable middle, in the quiet Tuesday evenings. In the years that have no particular peak, more in the long stretches of a relationship or a career or a life that are not dramatic enough to register as a moment worth keeping. Your brain is deleting those years. Not because they were worthless, because they were not extreme enough to save. Go back to that holiday. The one you thought of at the beginning, you're not actually remembering it, you are remembering 2 or 3 moments from it. And the way it ended, the person you were on all those other days, the one who ate breakfast and walked around and felt the sun and existed fully in those hours, that person's experience has been deleted. Your remembering self reviewed the file, kept the highlights, and closed it. And you have been carrying those highlights ever since, calling them a memory, building your sense of what was good and what was not from that tiny, distorted sample. Kahneman spent the second half of his career asking one question he never fully answered. If the remembering self is the one running your life, making your decisions, building your narrative, deciding what was worth it and what was not, but the experiencing self is the one actually living it, which one are you?